You're listening to the Subrogation Support Network, a podcast from Mattison, Wickert & Layer, America's subrogation law firm, with dissemination of new developments and changes in subrogation law, as well as emerging trends and best practices. Here's your host, Ashton Kirsch.
Hello, everybody. This is Ashton Kirsch, your host for today's episode of the Subrogation Support Network Podcast. We're also combining efforts right now and also going to have this be the first episode for a new podcast that we're launching, pretty similarly related, the Risk Business Podcast, where we're going to be interviewing and speaking with insurance professionals, claims specialists, attorneys, those handling insurance claims to talk about more generally insurance-related topics. But today, it's my honor to have one of my favorite people here in the Hartford office, Don Henderson, associate attorney with the firm Mattison, Wickert & Layer. Don, how are you doing?
I am doing great. Thanks for having me, Ashton.
Hey, beautiful. So today it's going to be kind of a new format. What we're going to do is we're going to just learn a little bit about you, talk about you, your practice. I think it's interesting because you're a newer attorney. You've been doing this for some time,
Yep.
a couple of years now. But you're younger. You're really, I think you have a unique insight to those coming into the industry, those who are thinking about going to law school or in law school, or maybe even thinking about transitioning and starting to move over to the insurance subrogation field. So before we get into some of the facts about the work you're doing, all that fun stuff, let's just talk about you. Tell me, where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school?
So I was born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Grew up on the north end of Milwaukee, right near the Wauwatosa border. I went to Craig Montessori for K through 8, so kindergarten all the way up into the end of middle school. Then I went to Riverside High School, Riverside University High School on the east side of Milwaukee. Once I graduated high school, I went to Bethany Lutheran College in Mankato, Minnesota. Excuse me, really small town, Mankato, in Minnesota. It's about an hour and a half south of the Twin Cities. I went there. I played basketball for my college. And once I graduated there, I came back to Milwaukee to go to Marquette University Law School.
Now, Mankato, was it for basketball that you went there, or why did you go to Mankato?
So they did recruit me for basketball, but it was honestly their legal studies program that kind of sealed the deal on me going. Another fun fact is my dad went there and played basketball and was being inducted into the Hall of Fame shortly after I got accepted. So it was just kind of a bunch of signs that all pointed to Bethany being the school for me at that time. And I loved it. My advisor at this school was Sarah Edwards, who had been a practicing attorney. And she was the one who kind of geared me and got me in the mindset that law school was not only a possibility, but was something that I probably needed to be a little more focused on doing. And so because of her, I was able to, strap the boots on and start pursuing law school.
So you didn't go there for the weather, I guess.
No, Minnesota weather is just as crazy as everyone talks about. It's insane. Wisconsin weather isn't amazing, but Minnesota weather is a little more extreme in every regard. It's a little colder, a little more snow, a little more windy. It's insane.
I still remember I went to a Gophers game once. The Badgers were playing the Gophers. And we get there, and I'm like, I've been to a number of Packers games. I've been to the frozen tundra out in Lambeau. This isn't bad at all. And I'm, I think it was a law student at the time. So, I had like a small coat on, whatever. I'll deal with this. I think it was like a negative 20-degree wind chill. And I was up there in those bleachers, and I've never left a sporting event because of really, and I stayed till the end, right?
Uh-huh.
Oh, I was out of there after the second quarter. I'm like, I'm not doing this. I'm going to watch it from a bar where there's heat and beer and all of that stuff. And it's cold.
Yeah, it gets pretty wicked in Minnesota. My best friend from high school, he rode with my parents. He played basketball at a school in Colorado, and he was home for fall break or something like that, and he rode with my parents to one of my basketball games. Excuse me. He rode with my parents to one of my basketball games, and it had to be about around the time it is now, middle of January. And I want to say it was a feels like temperature of like -20. And I remember him telling me as they were getting ready to drive back to Wisconsin, he was like, "Yeah, I love you, but this will probably be the last winter game I attend of your career." And I was like, "Yeah, I understand."
So for those of you who are not up here in the north, not northerners, I would say that we have weather that gets so cold that no joke, you can take boiling water, throw it in the air, and it will immediately evaporate. It's a true thing. I mean, it's bad, but yeah, enough about the weather. So when you were in Mankato, you played basketball.
I
What
did.
position did you play?
I was a point guard, almost exclusively. I do some work at the twos, here and there, but for the vast majority of the time that I was on the court, I was a point guard.
Very cool.
Mhm.
So you go to law school at Marquette. Why Marquette?
Well, it was really big on me to come home to Milwaukee and be closer to my family. Um, at the time when I was in Mankato, I had the opportunity to go to Mitchell, Hamlin, uh, St. Thomas, those schools in Minnesota. But I figured if I were going to move, 2 hours away from Mankato, I may as well just go the whole 5 hours back to Milwaukee, be closer to my family, and attend law school that way. And so that was important to me to get back home.
Now, the interesting thing is, are you a Marquette basketball fan?
I am,
You
yes,
are, okay.
yes.
I was figuring with the Mankato and then obviously
Yeah.
going there. I mean, that's a great team to cheer for.
Yeah, no, I love the Golden Eagles. Growing up, my dad would take me to a lot of their basketball games. I went to a couple camps. When Dwayne Wade was playing at Marquette, my dad was a huge fan of him, and so we would go see as many games as we could when we could work around his work schedule.
So when you went to Marquette, did you have an area of law that you were thinking about getting into? When you went to law school, what did you think? Where did you want to be in a few years?
I was convinced that I was going to be a criminal attorney, and it was looking back on it, I would say it was more
Like
so
a criminal attorney or an attorney who is a criminal?
no,
Like
no, a practicing criminal law attorney. Um, I think it was because criminal law is what's
Yeah.
commercialized with law. If you turn on a movie that has a lawyer in it, they're usually a criminal lawyer or a criminal defense lawyer. And I think that was kind of all that I had been exposed to at that time. And so, me, you know, not really knowing much about the practice of law at that time, I was like, oh, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a criminal defense attorney. And it was not long after the beginning of my first year, probably halfway through the first semester, I was like, you know what? Maybe criminal law isn't the path for me. From there, estate planning kind of took off as like the next thing that I was interested in doing. Until ultimately I ended up being here practicing insurance law.
Yeah, so the criminal law side, fascinating stuff. And I mean, I
Mhm.
could see you as a Lincoln lawyer, right?
Yeah.
Driving around, back of the car. I've always, having a driver and just being driven around to court
Mhm.
hearings, that sounds like a blast.
Yeah.
But then again, criminal law, I had a similar interest. I was like, constitutional law, something else. Then I started taking the criminal law classes, and I realized, I'm like, you know what? I grew up in small town Wisconsin. So if I became a criminal defense attorney or a family law attorney, I'd just be working for like my family and like old friends for free all day long. So it's like, we're going to avoid that. That's solid. So okay, so you then estate planning, you did that for a little bit. Is that right?
Yeah, I after my second year, I clerked at an estate planning firm downtown Milwaukee. Loved it there. Um, Worked there up until about, I want to say halfway through my third year. I was still clerking at that same firm. Um, um, I ultimately ended up accepting a position to do estate planning at a firm prior to starting here at MWL. But that firm ended up closing down due to the owner having some medical issues and things like that. So that firm ultimately ended up being closed, which led to me joining MWL.
Well, we're happy to have you
Mhm.
here.
I'm happy to be
I'm
here.
sorry that you have to deal with me. I say that to a lot of our people, but I'm not that bad, am I?
No, no, not at all. I love it here. I love the team we have at MWL, the office space, everything.
I'm glad you read off that note that I told you to read there. So what about MWL or what about subrogation kind of sparked your interest and caused you to say, hey, this is something I might, want to take a look at?
For me, I was really happy to have the opportunity to be in a practice that allowed me to litigate, but as well as to have a ton of like person to person communication. I really loved the how in Subro you're able to spend a lot of your time while you're litigating cases. You're mostly, dealing with opposing counsel or opposing adjusters and having a back and forth with them regarding liability, negotiating, damages, things like that. Because I love the litigation aspect of it, the adversarial aspect of it, but also I like to focus more so on negotiating and mediations and things like that. And I feel Subro does a good job of blending the litigation as well as the person to person communication between you and, opposing counsel or the adjuster on the other side. So
when new attorneys come into the space, or if, I'll go to law schools sometimes and do some trainings, or I'm speaking, I'm saying, it's like, okay, well, tell us about what you do. People usually don't understand subrogation, but then I kind of explain that, obviously I have a passion for it. I think you do too, but it's the idea that we get, I think, the best of all worlds, right? We get to be plaintiffs' attorneys. Sure, I'm never going to have a big sign at the side of the highway, bust your neck, I'll get you a check. I mean, maybe I'd have to convince, the other shareholders on that. But I don't think it would be, the value's not there.
Right.
But what we do have is we get that hustle, right? We get to be plaintiffs' attorneys, going for contingency fees, be able to build narratives, sell a case, negotiate. But also, we don't have to deal with the, like the psychiatry of injured parties where, that's a big part of any plaintiff's attorney's practice. Is we've brought in plaintiff's attorneys to work with us because plaintiff's attorneys do make great subrogation attorneys. And that's the one thing they love. They're like, oh man, I get all the good, but none of the bad. I don't need to beg and plead for my clients to understand, hey, you're not getting 100%. You're getting 98%. You should be ecstatic. So, yeah, I mean, what are the pros and cons that you're seeing so far in being a subrogation attorney?
Yeah, I would say a lot of what you just touched on. Another misconception I've at least experienced when I've dealt with explaining to people what subro is we're not taking money from the plaintiff's hand either. It's usually the case that we're recovering what we've already paid out to the plaintiff from the liable party. And so that's a big thing for me. I know another thing that I really like is that it's kind of a niche practice. And so whenever you're talking to someone about what you do or this area of law that you practice, it's usually the case that they know very little or nothing about what you're saying. And so you get this kind of expertise in a very small area of practice that not a ton of people, are experienced with. Another pro is, like I said, the opportunity to negotiate. We deal with a ton of like negotiations on a daily. And a lot of cases are just one negotiation away from being resolved. A con, depending on what area of practice you like, could be it's a volume practice. And so we talked about crim law a little bit earlier, whereas, a lot of criminal attorneys will have one main trial that they're prepping for, and they work on that same trial every day for 2-3 weeks. Whereas in our field, we may spend a few hours at a time on one case, but it's now on to the next one. And it's not usually the case that we're working on one matter day after day. It's one day, and then, you may touch on it again in a week or 2 weeks or something like that. And so it's a volume practice. Having to be able to juggle many balls in the air at once is really one of the things that you have to be prepared for. And then also your case, another con of subro could be your case kind of dictates how far litigation goes. Whereas you may have a claim where liability is pretty certain that adverse was responsible, but it's only 15,000-20,000 in damages. At that point, if it's depending on the type of case, it may be more expensive to pursue it than it is that you would be able to recover on it. And so sometimes, you have to deal with the reality that like, hey, we may have a pretty strong case here, but we just don't have the damages that would support, pursuing it as far as we need to on this one. And so that's a tough reality. And in those cases, you just kind of have to say, we've done what we can. And, there's not an economically feasible path for pursuing. So
absolutely. Now, one thing I love to do with subrogation attorneys is it's such a niche, specialized area that when you're talking to your buddies from law school and other people, if I'm out playing golf, I'm talking to somebody, it's like, well, what do you do? And I would always say, subrogation attorney. And it's like, oh, very cool. And a lot of people are like, sure, sounds good. And nobody knows what that is, right?
You can see it on their face.
What is everyone explains it differently. If somebody asks you, what do you say you do? How do you explain what it is?
My favorite way of explaining being a subrogation attorney is I'll usually start by just saying, yeah, I do subrogation work. And then like I said, you can see it on their face that they have no idea what you're referring to. And then I'll say the best way that I can explain it is we are hired by insurance companies to recover the money that they've paid to their insured that was paid to them due to an act or something that was like done by an adverse party. Basically recovered the money that the insurance carrier has already paid out. And that may spark some extra questions from them. Sometimes they're like, oh, okay, like, and still, drawing a blank, but that's usually where I start off with my explanation.
Yeah, that's good. It depends on who I'm talking to. I'm like, you sometimes say, I don't know, insurance subrogation. When a business sues a business, I represent the business suing the business, right?
Yeah, that's
primarily insurance companies. I don't know, but it is funny in the end. Is this like everyone kind of has a different way because it's not like family law, right? I say I handle family, like yeah, divorces, custody disputes, subrogation. Okay, right. So now, obviously, in this practice, there's a lot of different stuff we do. You handle a lot of my work. You handle a lot of work for others here. Your own work, and there's different. Obviously, we do workers' compensation subrogation, auto subrogation. We do health and disability. Pretty much all lines of subro. Is there one type of work that you're really enjoying the most so far?
Yeah, for me, the two that stand out would be workers' comp. Those claims I love doing workers' comp claims because each one is going to be different. Each story is going to be different. You deal with employees and an accident that takes place, on site or traveling to another site, wherever the case it may be. But each storyline from each set of facts following a workers' comp claim is going to be unique from the last. And I like that added spark to my day and my practice, and it keeps me interested in the claims and case files. And then the other type that I really enjoy working are auto claims. The auto claims dealing with the police reports of the accidents and the different theories of liability for why one party may be more responsible than another, or like the contributory negligence in the auto property claims. Those two types of claims that I work on here would probably be at the top of my list.
And I mean, the beauty of it, like you give work comp as an example, sure, every case is different, every injury is different, right? So we see it all, but also it's like the way we handle the cases are different.
Right.
So every state has different allocation formulas. Every state has different procedures, right? While in California, we may intervene and, be a party to the lawsuit.
Right.
In, Wisconsin, we have to, but in other states like Florida, in many situations, we really can't. We just file a notice of lien. So it's like we get to learn all about the facts, pursue it, but also we need to develop the requisite subject matter, or procedural expertise to know what to do with it. I mean, that's a beauty in my mind of subrogation, that every case we jump into is different, right? I have some buddies. I was just talking last week to a friend of mine who's a real estate attorney, and he loves it. I'm fascinated in real estate work, but I would fall, if there's any real estate attorneys listening, I'm sorry, but I would fall asleep if my job was just reading and drafting the same template contract with a few slight variants and then just setting it off. I mean, that'd be tough for me.
Yeah, that would be pretty miserable for me as well.
But here, every day is different. Maybe we don't have that driver to take us to and from trials.
Yes,
but,
that might change
one
things.
day. So, all right. Now, subrogation work, as we discussed, is really specialized. But are there any special areas, right, within, be it comp, auto claims, that you're trying to develop a special expertise in? I know one thing special about just the industry in general and being a niche industry is that you can be practicing for just a few years and be the expert, like the nationwide expert on this issue. Me, for example, I think I fell into a case with the MCS 90 endorsement in my first year. I wrote like 2 articles. Next thing you know, attorneys, adjusters from all over the country are contacting me. Ashton, a year and a half in associate attorney at the time, asking me for advice. And I'm like, well, now I guess I have to become an expert. And I worked backwards and learned, and now I am.
Right.
But it's really unique that we have this because we deal with nationwide practice of a niche area. We have the ability to really become pretty quickly subject matter experts in specific areas. Are there any of those areas that you're kind of developing that expertise in right now?
Yeah, so the first one, and I've done a lot of these cases working with you over the last few months, is we've been doing a lot of work with the Michigan No Fault Act, and that's a pretty, as you said, like a niche area of a very specific state. Um, and just dealing with that act has, you know, like you said, it forces you to kind of become an expert in a specific area, just kind of out of a necessity of having to work the files. And so, yeah, in researching that act, I've made calls to, several of our Michigan attorneys that we work with on a daily here at MWL, and sat down and read a lot of the statutes and the act itself, and yeah, that's the first thing that comes to mind in terms of an area that I'm working to become an expert in.
And it has nothing to do with the fact that I am awful with Michigan no fault and I need somebody. And Don was kind enough to really, be like, you know what, Ashton, I'm happy to come in and be the resident Michigan no fault expert, which is amazing because it is impossible, for a lot of people. But we get so many questions. I think you see them. We probably get, 2 or 3 questions a week that I'm sending off to you, Lance, somebody else to take a look at. And I do appreciate that.
Yeah,
So you know.
yeah. I mean, I get it. A lot of times the questions that we receive are, yeah, I mean, they're always new. It's never repeat questions, and so sometimes it's like, wow, I really do wonder how this statute would apply this unique set of facts, and then you got to do a little case law digging, and usually do some interpretation yourself and see how the court has kind of ruled on similar issues, and you'll be able to at least come to an answer that you're confident in. So yeah.
So for those listening who haven't dealt with no fault, if you're in auto claims, I'm sure you have, but I mean, we could talk for 2 hours about just no fault, but the idea of no fault was in the, early into mid last century, a lot of states realized that there was just too much litigation and they thought, well, hey, a solution would be let's make the insurance carrier for the individual who has the policy, be responsible irregardless of fault, right? So
Mhm.
no fault. So that would be that your carrier pays for the claim, and you're not just having to go against that adverse party. So if you're injured, right, it's usually under the form of PIP benefits. If you're injured, then your carrier in Michigan or one of the other states that applies it used to be many, many states. The states have now almost all done away with no fault rules. But it's just, it's paid out under PIP benefits, personal injury protection, and there's really no right or a very limited right to subrogation. Right?
Yeah,
I got this. Am I onto something? Tell me a bit about Michigan no fault. Like,
yeah.
what can we know?
So yeah, you're hitting it on the head. And basically, is when you're in an accident involving a motor vehicle, which Michigan is very specific on how it defines motor vehicle. There's uh, at least 2 statutes that provide you with a definition and exceptions to what counts as a motor vehicle and what does not. Um, if you're in Michigan as a Michigan resident, and you get into an accident that involves motor vehicles, then you are within the parameters of the Michigan No Fault Act. And there are some exceptions, but very few, that will allow you to get out of the confinements of the Michigan No Fault Act. But for the vast majority of accidents that take place in Michigan, there is no suing for fault under these on these vehicle accidents, and that includes even if I am hit by a motor vehicle and I'm not in a motor vehicle myself, then it still falls under the Michigan No Fault Act because it's an accident relating to a motor vehicle. And I know that we've dealt with past questions from clients that where they emailed us and asked like, hey, what if a homeowner is sitting in his living room and a car just comes crashing through the living room and hits him? Would he still be under the constraints of Michigan no fault? And
For
while
SOL purposes,
for
anyhow,
SOL
right?
purposes.
It's a limited 1 year
Mhm.
statute of limitations.
You have
right?
1 year to file a priority claim under these no fault under these motor vehicle accidents in Michigan. And if you miss that 1 year, you're done if it involves a motor vehicle. And uh, yeah, and then the example I gave about someone crashing into your living room, as odd as it sounds, that's still considered a motor vehicle accident, even though, you're sitting in your house watching TV on your living room when it happens. And so it's Michigan's very precise in how they intended that statute to be applied and how it is interpreted in the court, but it's pretty set in stone how it is.
I remember years ago I had a case where somebody that was unloading a trailer in the back of the truck, and the question was whether or not unloading the trailer when he fell out of the trailer was an injury related to a motor vehicle. And it's they are very broad, I remember, in applying what is a motor vehicle when that's the case.
Yeah, they give a lot of deference to it does involve a motor vehicle.
So the general rule would be if two Michigan residents are in an accident together, that there's no subrogation, right? There's no right to recover because that injured party doesn't have a third party tort claim against the other in person, but for limited sets of circumstances to get you out of no fault. Those circumstances would be, if one of the drivers was from another state, is that one of them?
Yeah, so a non-Michigan resident would present one way where you could subro a motor vehicle accident in Michigan. However, it's not just that simple that one of the residents or one of the drivers isn't a resident of Michigan, because it can be specific to the vehicle. Like I could be an Indiana resident that happens to be driving a vehicle that's registered in Michigan, and if my vehicle that's registered in Michigan is involved in an accident, then no fault still applies because the vehicle is registered in Michigan. And so, in a lot of ways, though, if in the majority of cases, because most people who are in an out-of-state resident also have an out-of-state vehicle, that's the case in most of these situations.
Right.
In that case, then the out-of-state resident would be deemed uninsured in Michigan case in a no-fault case. And even though they're deemed uninsured, we would still be able to pursue their actual auto carrier for the benefits of whatever state that they're actually a resident under.
So one of the exceptions for Michigan no fault is if one of the parties is uninsured.
Yeah.
So you can't get the protection of the no fault statute if you're not carrying insurance.
That's correct.
So case law and the way it's been interpreted, they apply this idea of uninsured to get out to those who don't have Michigan insurance, right? Okay.
So yeah, that's the most common exception is, a non-Michigan resident gets involved in an accident in Michigan.
Right.
That's the exception that we deal with the most in terms of the cases that I've worked on here.
Beautiful. Hey, interesting. I know anything else that's kind of struck your interest so far?
I know I also did me and Ryan Woody did a webinar on cargo shifting cases.
Okay.
And that was very interesting, I'd say myself. Obviously, I was one of the two attorneys doing the webinar on it, but we did a lot of the minority and majority opinions on the load shift case movement of load shift over the course of transporting it from one state to another, and how a lot of the rules and regulations tend to put a lot of the onus on the driver to make sure he's maintaining the safe condition of the load and checking on it, and every I believe it was every 150 miles, making sure everything is still secured and everything is still in place and nothing has shifted inside the actual trailer. And so that was another piece of law that I was able to kind of gain a lot of research and experience in dealing with too.
Could you imagine the nightmare on the highways if truck drivers actually did stop every 150 miles?
Yeah, I don't anticipate a ton do it, but yeah, it's that's kind of the responsibility of the driver. But yeah, that's an insane standard to place on drivers.
Those are big cases. We do a lot of that cargo work. That's kind of really what I cut my teeth on when I first joined the firm, is bringing a lot of that cargo work. And that was the load shift cases are interesting because what you often have is you have a shipper or whoever is loading it. Truck driver pulls up to the bay, dock leveler levels out, they bring the forklift down with the cargo, and the driver is typically one of two things. They either just have to stay in there and there's a red light, green light to tell them when they can proceed out, come in, or they have to wait in a waiting room. But it's seldom that they're actually allowed to go up on for safety reasons, to go up and actually watch the loading,
Hmm.
right? Usually they're just loaded. There's
Yeah.
plenty of situations where they aren't even able to look beforehand. They can't even watch it before it closes. But then the defendant, the shipper, in those situations almost always argues truck driver's responsibility. They should have secured the load. They should have checked.
And they should have, and a lot of
You didn't
times,
allow me to. I couldn't go anywhere. Or
Yeah.
there wasn't dunnage. And dunnage means like that would be like the cardboard or the blocks to put in place.
okay.
Like we couldn't, we weren't offered any of this,
Yeah. And a lot of times drivers will have the duty to inspect the load, but like you said, a ton of times they weren't there for when it was actually being, placed into the trailer, or depending on how full of cargo it is, you may not be able to get to the back of the trailer to see if certain things are, secured or bolted down or whatever the case may be. So, but yeah,
That's
it's
an issue.
the drivers definitely have a ton of responsibility that doesn't always isn't always practical to how the cargo is placed on the trailer.
Yeah, so I've dealt with a few of those cases, and it's like the FMCSA has rules where it says just that.
Mhm.
Here's all your responsibility, driver. You are ultimately responsible. And a lot of times the shippers, when we're pursuing them, they're like, oh, look, there's FMCSA guidelines. And I've proven in like few cases in litigation. So yeah, these guidelines are protecting the public,
Mhm.
meaning that if you, truck driver, cause damage because the load shifts, then you are liable to that other person in the public. That's
Exactly.
what that's all talking about. Right. But if we're talking about that, doesn't mean that the shipper is not ultimately responsible. They could be, crossed in or in some way pursued after the fact in contribution. So those are interesting cases.
So yeah, I mean they are, and they again, it's kind of you have to deal with a lot of the facts. It's like, well, did the shipper, give you confirmation that everything was secure and ready to be transported? And a lot of times it's like, well, that's not really how shippers and drivers communicate.
Right.
But that's kind of the different investigating things that you can look into for some of those cases.
Excellent. So now if you were to talk to a law student that's like, hey, I don't know what to do, I'm thinking about subrogation. What would you tell them? I mean, what would you say?
I would ask them, well, are they looking to get into an area? A, do they want to be a litigator? That's A. Because that's what we do. We do litigate cases. And B, if they do want to be a litigator, are you looking to more so be an attorney who's in court every day, or do you want to be an attorney who does a lot of like, you know, on the phone, emailing, Zoom negotiations with an adverse attorney or an adverse adjuster? And if it's the latter, then Subro could be, ideal for you as it is for me. That's a lot of what I love about Subro. If it's, you want to be in court every day, arguing motions, drafting briefs, things like that, which we do some, we just don't do it every day. Then it may be the case that maybe Subro isn't for you. But again, if you're like me and you enjoy the negotiation, the back and forth, and the bouncing numbers off each other and arguing about who's liable, who did what, who was contributory negligent, then I think Subro could be the field for you.
Our clients want their money today. They don't want to wait 2 years until after a trial. We can get that money in the door now, ideal. So no, that's perfect. Now, anything else? Like anything else you think that the audience should know about Don or your practice, or your thoughts on subrogation?
If they haven't picked up on it, I think I might have touched on it at the beginning. Again, like Ashton said, I've been here for a year and a month now. I love it. I've welcomed MWL into my life and my practice, and they've welcomed me into the firm. So it's been a great relationship. I enjoy my practice. I enjoy working here, and Subro was good to me. And if anyone has any questions about getting into Subro or an aspiring law student, I work with Marquette in their mentor and mentee program as well. And so if anyone has any questions for me, I'm available. Feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Well, Don, I appreciate you. Audience, thank you all so much. It's always a pleasure. That's really all I have to. I think this is great. This is a good format, right? Because we're able to kind of get to know each other a little bit more, right? The audience gets to know you. A lot of people listening, you're handling work for them, or maybe, hey, they might reach out to you now to ask you to handle some work.
Maybe we'll see. Like I said, my email's open. If not, I'm always available to discuss anything. So
Excellent. Well, hey, Don, thanks again. Audience, thank you. This is Ashton signing off with this episode of the Subrogation Support Network and Risky Business or Risk Business. Haven't totally decided what the name of the podcast is going to be just yet, but it's being released this will be the episode. You'll hear it on there. So again, thanks everyone.